It's not necessarily the craziest idea, but you've got to help consumers, make the choice easy for them and help them understand it. And like with upcycling specifically, we're talking about the products that would have otherwise gone to waste, gone to lower use. But you don't want to put the word, in my opinion, you don't want to put the word waste on a package, right? You don't want to make people feel like they're, dumpster diving or something, because they're not, they're not. But you still need them to understand the connection to the impact, or at least we want them to, because it's something that people want to feel good about what they're doing. And so it's an interesting marketing puzzle that's been really fun to make progress towards, where I think I wouldn't say we've 100% figured it out, at ReGrained, but, come a really long way. And it's, I think it's reflecting in some of the market trends that we were talking earlier.
This is Evolve CPG, a community of purpose-driven, sustainable product brand leaders who not only believe it better, but actively pursue it. I'm your host, Gage Mitchell, and today we're speaking with Dan Kurzrock, CEO and co-founder of ReGrained and board member of the Upcycled Food Association, a nonprofit focused on reducing food waste by growing the upcycled food economy.
Hello, fellow leaders and humans. I am Dan Kurzrock. I'm the co-founder and CEO of ReGrained. We're a food company, innovating using upcycling. We'll talk a bit more about that. I'm also a co-founder of the Upcycled Food Association and an officer on the board there. And super pumped to be with Gage and you all here today. I was invited here to chat with you about is what I think to be the ultimate intersection between doing well by doing good for the world. Upcycling is one of the leading solutions for food waste, which actually it was upgraded to the number one most pressing solution to solving the climate crisis by Project Drawdown.
We're number one this year. We're number one.
Yeah. Number one problem, number one solution. And what's really great about upcycling, as we'll get into, as a means of product innovation, and whether you're a marketer or a product developer or just a brand leader, is that it creates there's actually a for-profit opportunity to bring things to market that aren't just going to be more marketable because they're great tasting, better for people, better for the planet, but also because it's good for, all of those things. I already mentioned all of
the above.
Yeah, so it's really, there's not a lot out there that is authentically checking all the boxes, and upcycled foods, I think you'll agree, is one of those kind of fabled win-wins that gets talked about too much and is real not often enough. For those of you who are not as familiar with food waste as a global problem or as a global opportunity, as I like to think about it, I just wanted to go through some of the numbers, behind food waste as an issue. 40% is kind of the agreed upon amount in the US that we're wasting. So what that means is that one way to think about it is if you're leaving the grocery store with 5 bags, as a food system, we're basically dropping 2 in the parking lot. And that's just the status quo, that we're doing that on a daily basis. And what's incredible really about food waste, when you think about it, is that it's not just about wasted food. It's about all the resources that went into producing that food, as well as all of the meals and opportunities that could have provided. So when you look at some of these statistics up here, like the fact that 30% of all farmland is dedicated to crops that are grown and never eaten. We're talking about greenhouse gases if food waste were measured as a country. So when food waste ends up in a landfill environment, it releases methane. Methane's extremely potent as a greenhouse gas, and it's actually the third largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions after the U.S. and China.
Oh my God!
It's just, and then the economic opportunity is huge too, and we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars. And these estimates are staggering, but they overlook actually the potential from upcycled food, entirely, because with upcycled food, what we're really looking at are ingredients that would have otherwise not gone to human consumption, but they maybe are going to compost, or maybe they're going to biodigestion for energy creation. So it's about opportunity that's kind of being left off the table. And we'll go through some specific examples of that. And we've been successful at raising some awareness about upcycled food and the opportunity that it creates. And it's a really important part of the food waste puzzle. I mean, even if you just look at the volume of it, it dramatically increases the percentages and the stats of what's out there to do something better. What's exciting about upcycling is that it's a way, again, to create that win-win. So it's taking food and putting it to its best use, which is feeding people. And by doing that, we're building a better, more resilient food system. And it also really fosters tremendous collaboration, which is really exciting, because with upcycling, you're connecting the dots basically in a new way between different players in the food system. And while we're talking about innovation, we're talking about upcycling as this exciting new idea, I think it bears mentioning that this actually really isn't a new idea. The idea of doing more with less and of creating a food system that improves the way that we value resources, really creating co-products with the word byproducts. I mean, this is not a groundbreaking concept. Right here, we've got one of my favorite examples. This is a vat that's being used in the cheese making process. Gage, do you know what the byproduct from cheese is?
Whey, curds?
That's right, whey. Whey and curds, yep. And whey protein is ubiquitous, right? I see it in all over the grocery store. Whey is produced as a byproduct of the cheese making process. It's a market was successfully developed for it, and now you actually have whey producers where cheese is the byproduct. So the economics of that have kind of flipped, and it's I like to bring up this example because we're talking about common sense here, but with upcycling, we're really applying that in a new way to overlooked, underutilized streams that aren't that the market hasn't proactively addressed on its own. You could argue that pickling is an upcycled activity, and there's there's upcyclers that are in the pickling space. I mean, we're talking it's value added processing, right? So it's taking another example was like jams and preserves. Gage and I were talking about seal the seasons earlier and other types of products where you're looking at post harvest ways of taking perishables and extending their life. That is fundamentally a very similar idea to what we're doing with upcycling. But with upcycling, we're looking largely at crops and streams that aren't already being used. With ReGrained, we're a food tech company that uses. We actually have a patent on our ability to take the grain from the brewing process as well as other nutritious byproduct streams and convert them into new ingredients. If you look at the brewing industry specifically, there's tens of billions of pounds of barley primarily that's used for its sugar. The barley provides the sugar that the yeast then ferments, and we get our beloved age old beverage, right? But what's created at the same time is basically a huge batch of, think of it as like oatmeal, but it's barley. And so there is all the protein, the fiber, still left in this material. And it is currently not really being used for a whole lot besides, best case is really animal feed. So it's kind of something that we really felt was worth taking action on. Our business actually started out of my hobby for home brewing beer. I learned how to brew beer underage as an undergrad. And every time I made a batch, which I absolutely loved doing, I was just blown away by how much grain I was using as a part of that process. So I started making loaves of bread with it to sell to friends. And then I would sell those loaves, use the proceeds from that to buy more ingredients, to brew more beer for free. And that really and this is back in 2010, 2011, when I started doing this just as a hobby. And it really opened my eyes to the opportunity. And we realized, okay, what if we had a brewery that was also a bakery? That would be pretty cool. Make a lot of sense. Yeah. But then we started looking into that and it's like, okay, well, what are the commercial breweries doing? And so the idea got bigger and bigger as we figured out how we can apply this concept in a more and more meaningful way. So, our basic business model is that we take the grain from the beer brewing process. It's about a pound that's used for every 6-pack. And then we convert it into something that is similar to a flour and can be used in recipes. We have our own line of CPG products, which maybe we'll talk a bit about, not really the focus of today's session. We're using that as a way to build the market, but then selling ingredients through collaborative development partnerships with other food brands to help them bring those to market. And just to kind of underscore some of the environmental impact, with beer making, as an example, 90% of the water footprint is in the agricultural supply chain. You're using over 300 gallons of water, about 330 gallons of water to produce 1 pound of malt. That only the sugars are used in the beer making process. And so wouldn't it make sense to put its co-product to best use, as well, especially when there's all kinds of nutrition and flavor and functionality?
Oh, that's interesting. So to some degree, not only are you making a product out of what would have been basically waste, but you're maybe also helping make beer more sustainable too by reducing the
Yeah,
amount
I
of
mean,
water that technically goes into that product, because now it's spread across multiple products.
yeah, and it's not that brewers are wasteful, right? It's just there's no way, and brewers are actually generally great environmental stewards. There's just no way to produce beer without also producing this material. And for the brewer, they're generating so much of it, even small breweries, millions of pounds a year, that they just need to get it out, or they can't make more beer. And so it's kind of the path of least resistance. Generally that means they're either giving it away for animal feed if a farmer will come pick it up, and an urban brewery might have trouble doing that. And it could be a cost center for them, is what we found with urban breweries. They actually have to pay to have this stuff hauled away. But then to your point, by working with us, they also have this great story that they can tell of, hey, beer is an agricultural product. One of the main inputs, and by far the largest volume byproduct of this, is the grain that we've simply taken the sugars from. And, we work with ReGrained to turn that back into food. Our tagline used to be, have your beer and eat it too. And I think that really captures the kind of the spirit of our relationship with with the breweries. And we've taken this idea and we've kind of built it into a movement, not alone. We've got some other great companies that were early on in the upcycling game. I remember the first other company that I saw that had the word upcycled on their food product packaging is Barnana, who's known for their banana snacks and plantain chips, which they came out with later. And it's kind of we kind of had this moment together where like, we both arrived at the same, because upcycling as a term was actually coined in reference to material science, generally, and like circular economy, circular design. So looking at taking water bottles, for example, and turning them into an input for, like Patagonia's fleece, right? And taking, building materials and turning outputs into inputs, which is exactly what we're trying to do, but we're doing it with food, and it's not recycling. Recycling is when you put something back into kind of I guess in itself, so you think of a water bottle getting turned back into a water bottle to follow with that example. Recycling for food, for organic material, would be like making compost that you can then use to enrich the soil and grow more crops, which is way better than landfill, right? That's still going to a higher use, but it's kind of the lowest high use. And it's great for inedible, streams like coffee grounds and eggshells and things like that. Yeah, compost is great. But when we're talking about nutrition that could be used to feed people, even if you're looking at feeding animals, right, so it's better than a lot of the other lower uses. Same reason why you like having a plant-based diet is something that's more sustainable. We're talking about feeding humans directly.
Yeah, the way I like to think of it, like upcycling versus recycling versus downcycling, is just you're moving it up or down the value chain, or keeping the value basically the same. Like you said, a water bottle into another water bottle is kind of down the same path, right? But a water bottle that gets turned into a fleece or a park bench or something that's going to stick around a lot longer and hold a lot more value is upcycling. But then downcycling would be, what happens to a lot of plastic after a few rounds of recycling. Like it can no longer be used in that way, but maybe there's something else we can still do with the leftover bits and pieces, and probably lower down the value chain.
Absolutely. And, we need all of these solutions. But one of the things that's exciting about, as much as we can upcycle as possible, doing it is because what you're able to do then is replace virgin materials being used in a product's design, which has kind of ripple effect impacts, as you look upstream, for your products. And what's exciting is that it's also the huge market opportunity. Now that's a huge number of consumers that are indicating that they care about doing their part to reduce food waste. Matson did the study where they found that 60% are looking to buy more products with upcycled ingredients. That number jumped up to 80% once they actually were educated on what upcycling was. This is happening. Actually, Whole Foods this year named upcycled foods as a top 10 trend for the coming year. It's really exciting for me, having been working on this for so long, to see upcycled foods like having its moment. And it's really good for the Upcycled Food Association and for just, frankly, the world. New Hope did a study where they were looking at, they put on Expo West, and they found that since COVID, making environmental health is more important than ever. Paying more attention to food waste is actually over-indexed relative to the other issues as being something they're paying more attention to. Kind of fun. ReGrained actually got called out, specifically in this trend. It's really great to see the rising tide, if you will, of upcycled food and kind of where we're going with it. And what's most exciting about it is that it's a huge open tent where virtually every food company or product company can get involved with upcycling by making it a priority for innovation. And we're going to kind of get in later to what that looks like internally, looking at maybe some of your own like waste streams that could be better utilized, or through partnerships and sourcing, upcycled ingredients, to be key components of, new products. It's kind of this ultimate intersection between sustainability and health. And when it's done well, it's also like is incredibly tasty. In ReGrained's case specifically, like what we're making with our flour, we can use it in all kinds of different applications, from savory to sweet. Like if you can name it, we've probably regrained it. Like our vision as a company is not to bring all these products to market ourselves. What we're looking to do is work with other food companies on ultimately, creating products together. And there's just a huge range of versatility.
I love that tagline there. If you can name it, we probably regrained it.
Yeah, we just need you to help bring it to market, because we've got billions of pounds to focus on here. I did the math one time, actually, Gage, on what our impact would be if we were in $100 million a year brand in terms of sales. Which, big secret, we're not doing $100 million a year in sales right now. Not yet. That'd be a very successful milestone to reach, right? Is looking at the kind of bottom line metrics. Right? I guess that'd be top line, but we'd only work with like 4 breweries. And so, but we can make a lot more of a dent by getting our product inside of other product, kind of like Intel inside for food, if you will.
Nice. Yeah.
Just
so you said you crunched the numbers on what the impact would be.
Oh, that's what I'm saying. It'd be like, it'd only be the output of like a handful of breweries, even at 100 million in sales of consumer products.
Right. Wow. Okay. Yeah.
A pound per 6-pack. I mean, just, consider that for a minute. It's like really hard to visualize what 20 billion pounds of a material looks like. And then what we're able to do is like, it turns out this technology that we developed at the USDA to do this, it works well for like oats from the oat milk production and, other kind of beverage, saturated, byproducts. And so we're really interested, and a lot of other upcyclers, many in the association, and, we all need partners in order to actually bring these things to life. But what we're looking to do is like, bring these new ingredients into availability, commercial viability, and have to be economically feasible. Obviously, food safety is incredibly important when you're looking at rescuing from another, so like rescuing in line is super important. But this is, I think, one of the most exciting frontiers of climate action, for, brand marketers and product developers, because it's something that's like, unlike a lot of these other issues, like, choosing to engage in upcycling is 100% in your control. When you look at like carbon footprint and, all these other environmental action, that's all super important. It can also feel very intimidating and, intractable, because there's just like so complicated. There's so many different things to consider that are interconnected and just, frankly, complicated. And that can be paralyzing. Like I get it. But with something like upcycling, it's a lot more kind of intuitive and clear cut and fun. And it's not the only thing I hope people are doing to take climate action. But I think it's one of the, I guess, to be a little punny, kind of the low hanging fruit on this. So that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited to just share our philosophy and our excitement for it.
Yeah. One of the fun things is with a lot of sustainability, I think it's hard to move into the mainstream because it's all about doing less, like taking shorter showers or buying less packaging or eating less meat or whatever. But with upcycling, you get to do more. You get to eat as much as you want, like buy as much as you want, and like make sure and know that it's like going towards something good.
Totally. And it's this idea of, there's a lot of focus on doing less bad, which is kind of, part of what you're getting at. And what's exciting about upcycling is it's one of the opportunities to do more good, right? And that's a very empowering purpose, I think, to embrace.
Yeah.
So just to go through some other, and then we'll get into some more discussion, but wanted to just kind of seed some inspiration by showing some other examples of upcycling. This is just like the pickles and the whey. If you look at like vegetables and root to stem opportunities, I mean, if you're for like trained chefs, for example, they don't waste anything. You use scraps to make soup stock, and all kinds of other things. I love the carrot example, because carrot tops, if you've shopped at the farmer's market or, in the organic section of the aisle where they're actually still, on the carrot, most people are just like, they just like toss them, right? Because it's not, seen as edible, but it's actually very similar to parsley in flavor, and it can be used to make like chimichurri and, fun like sauces, or mixed in as an herb, fresh herb inclusion in various dishes.
I like to throw it in my soups as like an extra green element, extra seasoning too.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not surprised that you're doing that. And I'm proud of you, man.
I do my part.
Yeah. I know this is one of both of our favorite examples of like what upcycling internally can look like. Farmhouse cultures, they started with their kraut, right? And now they have a full product family that's actually like really integrated in how the supply chain works. Do you remember the exact sequence of how this? I think the kraut came first, and then they realized they had like the juice left over that could be used for the gut shot, right? And then they started making more of that, and so then they had more of the pressings from the kraut than they needed for the kraut itself, and so then they made chips with that. I think that's how that progression worked.
That's the way I heard it,
which is awesome, right? I mean, and it makes sense too, because like, why would they throw something away or send it to farm use or some of these other? If they can just create another product that they can then sell, and all these products, in my opinion, at least, I mean, I just love kimchi and fermented things too. So I'm kind of a sucker for this stuff. But they're all delicious, and it makes good business sense too. So it can be talked about as upcycled or not. It also just makes financial sense to not waste.
And what I don't know about this case study is whether they saw the trend going towards things like gut shots and they're like, wait a minute, we've got all that juice sitting around. We could easily bottle that up and it'll sell. Or if they had just noticed over time, like, wow, we're just dumping a lot of juice. Like maybe if we package it up, people will enjoy it. And then obviously the chips was just kind of a brilliant move that made sense because everybody loves good snacking products.
Mm-hmm. That's something, we've really leaned into with ReGrained too. It's like, if you can make something snackable, make doing good as easy as a snack for your body and the planet. I mean, that's pretty powerful stuff. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly where the inspiration came from that. I would suspect from talking to them. To me, my impression was more the scenario that you described, where it's like, hey, we've got a lot of this stuff. What can we do with it? And yeah, it's good stuff. Another example, more in the animal protein side of things. I don't know if they're still making all of these products since post acquisition and everything. But you look at like Epic Provisions, and they've got products that use the whole animal, right? Just kind of again, common sense, right? These products aren't marketed as upcycled, but I would argue that they are upcycled.
Yeah, and I think that's a good example too of what you were saying before, where it's not new. Like if we go back to earlier times when economically it made sense to use every piece of the animal you possibly could so that you don't have to burn the energy or money either buying a new animal or going to hunt another one.
Right.
So I think they were just kind of bringing that back into mainstream culture, that idea of like use the whole animal, and then it also counts as upcycling.
Yeah, it's just funny because these are very old ideas. It's just as our food system has gotten more and more industrialized and specialized, too often we've kind of veered away from that idea. Like waste is just built into the system. It's just it's the status quo. It's how we're
more focused on speed and scale than we were on efficiency or effectiveness. And then next thing you know, things just got out of control. Like we didn't notice how bad it was getting until it was really bad. And we saw the numbers of the numbers you were showing before of how much food is wasted. And then it's eye opening. Exactly. That's actually one of the ways I like to describe organic as well. When, earlier in the days when I was bringing organic food to the office and coworkers are like, ew, that's gross. What is that weird stuff that probably tastes like crap and has dirt in it or something? But I would just like to remind people that, well, this is actually the way food has been since.
Yeah, we didn't used to have to call it organic.
Yeah. There was only until the 40s or 60s when we started changing the way we do things that we moved away from organic. But literally for millions of years, every animal or species that came before us has been eating organic, and we were eating organic up until your grandparents' age, and then we just switched. So I'm just eating what we've always ate. You're eating the weird stuff. It's just kind of a weird, and it's just all about wording too, I think, because organic had to take on this extra label of organic, and then non-organic food, which was actually the weird new stuff, got to use the term conventional.
Right.
How did we get into that mess? That was ridiculous.
So back ass words, right? And and then there's education that's required too. So you think about something like upcycling, and It's not necessarily the craziest idea, but you've got to help consumers, make the choice easy for them and help them understand it. And like with upcycling specifically, we're talking about the products that would have otherwise gone to waste, gone to lower use. But you don't want to put the word, in my opinion, you don't want to put the word waste on a package, right? You don't want to make people feel like they're, dumpster diving or something, because they're not, they're not. But you still need them to understand the connection to the impact, or at least we want them to, because it's something that people want to feel good about what they're doing. And so it's an interesting marketing puzzle that's been really fun to make progress towards, where I think I wouldn't say we've 100% figured it out at ReGrained, but come a really long way. And it's I think it's reflecting in some of the market trends that we were talking earlier.
So this image you're showing, I like the idea of squash guts vinegar.
Yeah, squash guts. So this is Spare Food Co. It's Chef Adam Kay and his brother Jeremy. Adam was the culinary director and sous chef at Blue Hill and Stone Barns. Dan Barber, who's the famous chef that he was really leading that with him, and he's been very active in food waste from a culinary perspective. And he lent me this image to use in presentations. I think it's a great example of like looking at something that we think of pumpkin seeds, right? But like, what about other types of squashes? What else can be done? We were talking about the kraut chips, foragers chips, veggie chips, use fruits and vegetables that were pressed, in the juicing process. I really like the positioning of fresh pressed vegetables too, as opposed to pulp. There's another great brand, Pulp Pantry, that's out there that's doing chips out of juice pulp. What was cool about Forager, I thought, was that it was another example of kind of their own internal process. And I think I think they aren't focused as much on the snacks anymore, because they've really gotten into plant-based dairy as opposed to more juice. But when they were doing a lot of juice and they were creating a lot of pulp, and they launched these, and I think these started selling really well, and then they started sourcing pulp from other juice companies.
Nice.
Kind of neat. One of my other favorite examples I like to bring up is coffee. The coffee plant is amazing. We only consume the pit, right? The bean is like the pit of a cherry. It gets roasted and whatnot. It's everything that we associate with coffee is with the bean, but it comes from the inside of a fruit, and that fruit is often discarded at the country of origin. You've seen it marketed perhaps in the last few years as cascara, is another name for the coffee fruit or the coffee cherry. It's got a lot of antioxidants, and it's also got a lot of caffeine in it too. So it's being used in energy drinks. One of the most commercial scale examples of coffee fruit being used is by the low sugar beverage. I believe they're owned by Pepsi now, maybe Coke. They have coffee fruit extract, in their products as a source of antioxidants. The coffee plant also has a leaf. There's a company called Wise Monkey up in Canada that makes a tea out of that coffee leaf. It's a really interesting product.
Yeah, I think cacao pods are the same kind of way. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, exactly. Repurposed Pod is not doing this anymore. I believe there's a few other companies that have come across recently that are looking at the cacao fruit. Kind of similar idea where there's a pulp. It's actually, have you ever had it before, Gage?
I haven't.
It's a really interesting flavor, like interesting in a good way. It's got like this tropical fruit profile that's like kind of hard to describe. It's kind of its own thing. It's not, it's not like exactly like a mango or a pineapple, or, it's got its own profile. It's very sweet. There's a company making a sweetener out of it. I don't know how to pronounce their name. It's like XOCA, like Exoca, something like that, where they sell like a honey almost that can be used as an ingredient in food products. It's a really interesting supply chain. Mondelez launched a product called Yay Cacao or Yay Cow, something like that, last year. Apologies, my memory is not perfect on the brand name, but it was a similar idea where it took because they obviously as Mondelez, they make a lot of chocolate products, and so they've got a lot of this in their supply chain, and so they kind of brought a innovation to market under like as a sub brand. Then there's Barry Callebaut, who's one of the big, a great like chocolate provider in the industry, and they just launched a whole fruit chocolate bar. So like a lot of times chocolate has sugar added to it, right? Even dark chocolate has sugar added to it. So why not use the sugar from the cacao fruit as a part of that? That was what they did. Probably my favorite example that I like to end with before heading off into whatever discussion territory we want to from here, Gage, is that of Toast Ale. This is an old brand shot of theirs. They've kind of updated their brand since then. But what they're doing is they're taking surplus bread. So like bread generates massive amounts of waste at the retail level because it's very difficult to do inventory planning with bread, and it's got a very short shelf life. And so it's one of the largest components that, is making up the food waste streams exiting retailers in particular. And there's so much of it that the food banks have way too much bread too. No one wants the surplus bread, but similarly, all those resources went into making the bread itself. And so Toast figured out a way, and it's actually based on a pretty old traditional brew called kvass, out of Eastern Europe. You actually take some of the fermentable sugars that are in the bread and use it to make beer. And so I always like to end with this one because they're kind of the flip side of what we're doing, with ReGrained. And so it's like from bread into beer and back again. We'll definitely have some. We love to talk about doing stuff like that, and hopefully we'll have some collaborations in the future. But I think really, really creative way to brew beer, using what would have otherwise gone to waste. And so,
yeah,
that's
awesome.
I'm thirsty and hungry.
Yeah, it really makes it a liquid bread then. Like beer's always joked about.
Yeah, it gives it a whole new meaning, right?
Yeah, that's great. That's fun. Thanks for sharing those examples. So, as we talked about before this, I think there's a lot of opportunities for other companies to dig into upcycling. And we'll share kind of a framework a little bit later, but just out of curiosity, when other companies are coming to you, maybe mentioning that they want to get into upcycling, what's your first tip for them?
Stop thinking about it and start doing, right? Like the hardest part for a lot of groups is to just take action on ideas. I think with upcycling, it also presents a really interesting opportunity to break down the traditional silos that exist within a company, especially within big companies, because a lot of times new ingredients will live in like product development land where they, will do trials, and they're always very interested in trying new ingredients. I've never met a product developer that's like not interested in trying a new ingredient, but without a path to market, it's not going to go anywhere. Right. And, so involving the marketing teams pretty early on, and it's actually really great when it starts from the commercial side of the business and then goes into, R&D, because then you've got a case like saying, hey, like we're interested in positioning products as being upcycled. Let's develop with that directive. And kind of a level deeper than that is actually involving the sustainability folks that are now, there's now like full-time sustainability teams, or at least individuals at most companies now that are, they're sustainability professionals. I actually have a grad degree, sustainable business degree, and a lot of my fellow alumni and peers, these are the types of roles that they're in. They go in these, into other companies and help run corporate social responsibility and environmental, initiatives. And food waste is a topic actually that many companies, virtually all of the big ones, have public, commitments against drawing down on food waste as a means of climate action. And involving that also can help make it stickier internally. And so, really like to encourage cross-team, collaboration when thinking about upcycling as an opportunity. And that can help get projects going a little smoother.
Yeah, that makes sense. So a couple things that we mentioned, I think, during this earlier part of the presentation is sometimes it's the market demand maybe that can drive it, like, gut shots all of a sudden becoming a thing, and you realize you've got all this juice that you could be packaging up as a gut shot that you've been kind of wasting before. And then sometimes it's just awareness of your supply chain that can drive a product idea, and in which case maybe you realize you're dumping all this juice and you could do something with it. So then identifying where to go from there. Yeah,
or also like upstream from your own supply chain, like maybe you're sourcing. So the chocolate example, maybe you're sourcing chocolate, right? And if you tell your supplier that you would, just using the chocolate as an example, that assuming they know how to process it and all that kind of stuff, you say, hey, like we would actually like to use some of the byproducts. Is that something that you could provide to us? That could also create, shared value in that way. And because most, many food companies aren't like finished food companies are not ingredient companies, right? And ingredient companies need demand from the food companies in order to do it. And so I think it's like, if you're doing your own production and looking at that's great. And then also looking upstream to things that you might be sourcing externally and saying, okay, are there any other kind of co-products that can help make this like a holistic upcycled product? And I think you're going to go to my next point next.
Well, just a quick tangent before we go there, but one thing that occurred to me too, based on that comment is, like many things sustainability focused, there is not just about using that product that would have otherwise gone to waste. But now, like you mentioned, if you're talking to your ingredient supplier and asking them, hey, what can we do with some of that stuff that's being wasted? You're also giving them an extra income earning opportunity where maybe they'll have to do a little bit of extra work to process that and get it ready for whatever. But really that value is already there. They just need to do something with it. So creating more economic value for your suppliers, which will hopefully build a better relationship with them as well.
Oh, 100%, especially for crops that are, imported from, like the global South, things that you might be associate with like having a fair trade certification, right? Because of the various economic drivers behind that. So like coffee and chocolate and sugar and whatnot. And so like if you look at like the coffee example, you go to a coffee shop and you pay a few bucks for a cup of coffee. The farmers are generally making cents, like single digit cents. And there's a lot of labor actually that goes into cultivating and processing coffee. And so by saying, hey, well, we'll also, buy the coffee fruit, it creates another crop for them. The other thing is the coffee harvest is once a year. And so with the coffee leaf model, and Wise Monkey, some great information available about this. It creates an opportunity also for them to have income year round. It's like, okay, with this one tree, that we've been cultivating for so long, that has only been producing one crop, now there's 3 crops that can be created from it.
Yeah.
And it needs to be done, with things like leaves. Like you can't obviously pick all the leaves and all the plants, or it's going to reduce the productivity of the plant and, damage it and whatnot. But it's a great point bringing up and it's creates shared value, and it's just good for everybody.
Yeah. It's not exactly on topic with upcycling, but that reminds me of what Alter Eco is doing a lot with their kind of efforts for reforestation of farmland, basically of doing agroforestry, by where maybe there was a monoculture cacao farm before, you bring in banana trees and shade trees and a bunch of other kind of plants that can create more of a diverse forest there that then is self-supporting. It creates more shade for the farm workers. It creates more like fruit trees and other things that they can use to have other sources of income, like you were mentioning, but then also creates, better products in the end as well. So there's lots of things that can be done to help create better relationships and more value for your supply chain, which I think is helpful. But I guess back to upcycling. So for people who are looking to get into upcycling, help them foresee some of their biggest challenges. Like what have you seen in your own business or in other people's businesses that is a sticking point that if they know that ahead of time, maybe they can overcome it?
A few things. One is that you can get involved with upcycling by simply sourcing upcycled ingredients from companies like ReGrained and the others in the Upcycled Food Association. Renewal Mills, another great company. They're doing Okara for soy milk production. There's just we have over 120 members now. And many of them there's some good competition going on in there. There's just so much competition, meaning like there's multiple companies working on the same thing, because there's so much available. And so I think it's important to note that we're not just talking about looking at like upcycling from within your own operation, but ways to work with companies that are trying to develop markets for this and operate on that sort of scale. In that, it is really like food safety is really, really important, and it's important to know that like who you're working with, and they know what they're doing in that respect. I think with something like upcycling, it's such a big opportunity that it leads to many people wanting to, I guess, capitalize on it. And it's just like with anything, choose your partners carefully. There are definitely like great ones out there. We'd certainly love to work with anyone on various projects. Another thing is there's sometimes a perception that because these are, ingredients that would have gone to waste, that they're going to be cheaper. And we're still at the early stages of the market here. And one of the unique things about upcycled business models is that we have a vertically integrated supply chain in many cases. So like if you look at, and I can always just speak to ReGrained more specifically than others, because it's the business I'm building. We had to invent technology, and we had to build a plant, and at scale, like longer term, the costs will come down a lot. We're actually not. It's not like we're a Ferrari of ingredients, but we're also not like necessarily a used Corolla or something. Where we're talking about novel ingredients. They're not one-to-one substitutions. That's another thing that we can talk about in a second. And so it's not great to look at it as like a substitution for what you're already doing. Where I think it makes a lot more sense is to look at new product development, going into what is the white space that you're looking to go into as a brand. Maybe it's in the snacking set, or maybe it's, different extensions, or maybe it's, if you're a huge food company, maybe it's creating another sub brand that can commercialize some of these ideas and creating new products that incorporate this from the beginning, as opposed to trying to work backwards and reach parity in any respect, with an existing product. I think, the opportunity with upcycling is on net new, is on create. And
that makes sense.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm hearing there is, if there's a partner out there, somebody you can partner with who's already invested in all the supply chain and so on and so forth, or the manufacturing equipment and the process, definitely start there, because obviously then you don't have to buy all the equipment and figure out how to do it and so on and so forth. But also, therefore, by helping grow that specific supply chain, you're also helping bring the cost down for yourself and everyone else.
Yeah, it's like, let's all focus on doing what we do best, and working together towards solutions. So like, with ReGrained, we have consumer products because we're trying to build demand for this new ingredient, but our focus long term isn't on that. There's a lot of great companies out there that make finished goods products. You're experts at developing products, bringing them to market, distributing them. We don't want to reinvent that wheel. We want to help play a role in deciding where it's rolling, right? By providing this new supply chain that brings all the benefits that we've talked about on the on the call, and in virtually every aisle of the grocery store, on every menu that you could think of for a restaurant. Like there's opportunities to bring upcycled food and more broadly just action against reducing waste and climate action. It just takes thinking creatively, but then taking action on those creative ideas.
That makes sense. One of my favorite new phrases is "done starts with do." So
I like that.
Just get started, and
I'm going to upcycle that.
You'll eventually find your way there. Yeah, that's helpful. So to some degree, maybe it's like, if you have something like farmhouse example that you mentioned, if you've got something that you're throwing away that you could easily just put in a bottle or something and sell it, great. That's a good place to start. But really, it's the more tangible territory is in creating new products, and in some of those cases, ideally, partner with somebody who's already an expert in that. But in a case where there is no partner, maybe you can be bold and brave and kind of figure out a process and buy equipment and stuff like that. And then you can now have a new revenue stream of selling that to other people.
Talk about it. I think this is, we live in a world where the way I like to think about it is, it's not that everyone cares about everything that you're doing, right? Just like, but there are groups of humans that care about each of the things that you're doing. And this is one that, you can use your operations as marketing, right? With upcycling. And I think that there's a level of authenticity there that, really, earns loyalty from your customers.
Yeah, that makes sense. Speaking of talking about it, plug the Upcycled Food Association real quick. What are y'all working on? How do people get involved? Do you already need to be upcycling in order to be a member?
Yeah, the Upcycled Food Association, it's an industry nonprofit. 10 companies came together about a year ago to found it, of which ReGrained was one. We now have over 120 members. They're including some big international companies like Dole Foods is a member. There's associate members and full members. To be a member, though, it's more about like the service level that you want from the organization, as opposed to the type of business that you are. Being a full member, of course, has the most. So even if you're just interested in upcycling or creating, upcycled, product lines, maybe starting as an associate member is a good way to do that, to kind of get on the inside track of it. So this year we did three main things. One was start the organization. We're trying to get to 75 members this year. We obviously did a lot better than that, which is super exciting. The second was to define upcycled foods. We actually released the first official definition of what upcycled foods are, and it was done not by the association, it was overseen by the association in partnership with stakeholders from academics and from the public sector. And it's really great to see. And you can download that full report on the upcycledfood.org website. And then taking that definition and we set up a committee. I think there's 20 people on it, of, again, not the board, not the members, although there's some member representation on this committee, but it's a task force basically to create the first upcycled food standard, for certifying. And so there's actually right now, depending on when this goes live, we're recording this at the end of November. there's a draft of that certification that's publicly available that actually we're really looking for public comment on. And so if you go to the Upcycled Food website, it's like one of the top links, to look at the standard and to comment on it. And by Q1, we hope to start certifying the world's first certified upcycled products, which will really be a hallmark achievement for the movement, because it'll create the idea is it creates a standard of identity that can lift all boats. And I got to say, we're working with some really talented designers on what that certification will look like.
Yeah, I hear they're pretty awesome. Side note, that's Modern Species. Yeah, we're excited to work with you on that, partly because, we love interesting challenges, but also, like we mentioned at the beginning of this, it's one of our best chances to reverse climate change. So anything we can do to push the world forward towards more sustainability or regenerative lifestyles and culture, we're all for it. So that's awesome. Well, thanks for sharing the upcycling story and sharing some pro tips with the community, and appreciate your time coming out. And we'll point people to ReGrained as well as Upcycled Food Association and other links in show notes or comments, etc.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. Thanks so much for having me. As I always like to say, I'm super easy to find and love to engage with just this incredible industry that we're all, a part of together. And so great having the opportunity to share some, hopefully you'll see some insight, not just, babble from a guy that cares a lot about eating beer, and, looking forward to seeing what we can all do together.
Awesome. Cheers.
Cheers.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Dan. I sure did. But I also thought it would be cool to give you something actionable to take away from that. So there's a lot of good inspiration, a lot of good information, but now how do we turn that into action? So to do that, I came up with a simple 4-step process that you can try implementing for your own brand to identify upcycling opportunity. It goes from identify to rescue to innovate to filter. Pretty simple 4-step process. Obviously, can get much more complex as you're workshopping it, and I'll let you figure that out on your own for now, but I'll just give you a place to start. All right, the first step you want to start with, of course, is identify. And that just means identifying what you could be working with. So you'll start by mapping out your inputs and your outputs within your own operations first, because that's where you have all the knowledge already. You could probably just do that pretty quickly on your own right now. Then, if you want to go a bit deeper, you can start by identifying inputs, outputs, and waste that are within your supply chain. So that might be your farmers, your manufacturers, your growers, your whatever your product is. You'll have a whole supply chain around that. And start by talking to them about what are all your inputs, what are your outputs, what are we losing in the middle of that process, and is there something we can capture in that process? For now, you don't need to have the solutions for what to do with those things. Just get it all on paper and identify the opportunities for wasted materials. Now, let's assume that waste in the process isn't something that you can just kind of tweak the system a little bit to eliminate that waste. Obviously, if you can do that, just go ahead and do that to start with. But let's just assume, for the sake of this exercise, that those are things that you can't tweak out of the system and that's just waste. It's just going to be there. But maybe we can do something with that waste. So the next step is rescue. Now, how could we take the raw materials that are just being thrown out, recycled, composted, whatever, that's being downcycled or trashed in general? How can we capture those things and extend their life and make them more useful, functional, and sellable? It'll probably have to go through some sort of process, because you just take the wasted produce, for example, that's the leftover choppings while you're making your soup. You'll need to actually do something with those things, whether that's freeze it, dry it, powder it, whatever. But think through both how you can actually rescue that item to extend its useful life. Now you have not only some identified waste opportunities, but some ideas of what you could do to extend that and maybe even sell it as its own ingredient, which is a feasible path. But let's say you want to create your own value add product with those ingredients. So now, with all those kind of ingredients that you're working with in different forms that you've come up with, what are some different product ideas that you could create that fit your brand and your market? So obviously start by working in your own category. Let's say you're working in functional beverages. So maybe you've identified a new ingredient that you can work with for your functional beverages. maybe you want to go into a new category. Let's say you are a functional beverage and you want to move into healthy snacking. Well, that could be also a good place to explore. But first of all, just define some parameters where you want to innovate, but also keep in mind hot consumer trends that are on the market right now, because obviously launching a product that's already desired is a good place to start rather than having to create a new category or something. But just come up with all the different products you can. That could be simple tweaks to a single ingredient to make it really tasty or chewy or whatever. It could be multi-ingredient value-add products, but just come up with a whole range of ideas at this stage, blue sky territory. Now, to get a little bit more realistic, step 4 is filter. So you're going to put those ideas through a process of deciding which ones make the most sense to move forward with. In my personal opinion, I would start by putting it through your brand filter, however you currently kind of evaluate product opportunities. Then put it through some sort of feasibility filter. For example, if this idea is going to take $2 million and 10 years to get off the ground, while you might decide that's a worthy goal to pursue, you might also want to find some opportunities that are more short-term and easier to get off the ground within your own operations, and you might not even need to tap the rest of your supply chain. But figure out how you want to assess and how many projects you want to take on. And then, of course, prototype those and price them, market test with consumers and retailers and what else you need to do. But obviously, filter those ideas. So again, those 4 steps, pretty simple. Just giving you a place to start. Identify your wasted materials, rescue them in any way you can so that you can extend their usefulness, then find innovative new product ideas, and then filter them based on what makes sense for you, your brand, your budget, whatever else. Should be fairly easy to get going. If you want some more inspiration beyond what you heard on today's conversation, go to www.upcycledfood.org and you can see a whole list of their upcycled food or even personal care or pet food. They've got a bunch of different clients on there, but just go to their website, check out who's the members of that association and see what kind of products they're launching, because you'll probably get even more inspiration from there that you might be able to pull into your own innovation process. All right, I hope that's helpful. Just wanted to give you something a little actionable. Again, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about Dan, his company, or the Upcycled Food Association, go to regrained.com and upcycledfood.org. Subscribe to our podcast and YouTube channel for more innovator interviews, expert advice, and leadership discussions. If you like this episode, hit that like button and share it with your colleagues. And of course, send us feedback and ideas for who we should talk to next at evolve@modernspecies.com, and learn about our upcoming online community at evolvecpg.com. See you next week.